Hello, in this video we're going to look at multiplying and dividing surds. So we've done adding and subtracting. Now we'll look at multiplying and dividing surds. So let's go through the key ideas first. So all key ideas should be going into your bound reference as well as the examples I work through. So don't just think, oh, you're going to remember it. It's always a good idea to have worked examples in your bound reference as well. All right, so the first key idea, when multiplying surds, use the following result. So basically, whatever your base is, whatever is under that square root sign, can be multiplied by whatever is under this square root sign. So we've got the square root of xy. If you have a number other than 1 in front of the square root, so a is just representing a number and b is just representing the number, you multiply a and b, and the x and the y, so you get this result here. The second point, when dividing surds, use the following result. So the square root of x divided the square root of y, you can put that all under one square root. Okay, and the reverse applies as well, so you can go to that as well. And then if you had a coefficient or a number in front of your square root sign, you can separate it into a fraction like that. And then the third point, in expanding brackets, okay, so the same rule applies. If you had surds, okay, we're still using the distributive law to expand the bracket. So a times b and then a times c. All right, so let's work through a few of the questions. So there's quite a few questions on this worksheet. It's probably a good idea to do them all. The solutions are at the end for you, but I'll just do a few examples with you just to show you how it's done. Okay, so the first one, we've got the square root of 7 times the square root of 3. So remember, whatever is underneath the square root sign can go under its own. So we've got the square root of 21. Now, some surds you can simplify. Okay, so just remember, ask yourself, is this the simplified version? So when you're simplifying, remember you ask yourself, first of all, do any square numbers go into, so in this case, 21? No. So remember your square numbers 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, and so on. Okay, so that's our final answer. All right, let's go and have a look at E. So we've got the square root of 5 times the square root of 5. And that becomes square root of 5 times 5, which is square root of 25. Your answer is 5. So in this case, we could simplify because we had the square root of 25. And you'll notice these questions here. Square root of 3 times the square root of 3 will just be 3. Square root of 9 times the square root of 9 will also just be 9. All right, let's do G, because I can just see it at the bottom there. Square root of 14 times the square root of 7. So under here we have 14 times 7. Now 14 times 7 is a little hard to do, so you can do it on the side. So I would do, or in your head, so 7 times 10 is 70, plus 7 times 4, which is 28. So it's going to be the square root of 98. And then we've got square root of 98 can be simplified to 49 times 2. So it's an example of one that we can simplify. So remember back to 3a. So that becomes 7 root 2. And you could have simplified that here. Okay, so if you couldn't do the 14 times 7, and I might just do this at the top here. Square root of 14, you could have written as 7 times 2. So then effectively you would have, this would be the square root. I might just put it in square root of 2 first. Okay, so you can see the square root of 7 times the square root of 7 will just become 7. and then we've got the square root of 2 there. So either way you could do it, okay, but here's the method that we applied for A and E, but this one here is separating that 14 to 7 times 2 and allowing the square root of 7 times the square root of 7 to become 7 on its own. All right, let's move on. Maybe do a few more on here. Okay, so we just did G. Let's look at H, because H, I'll show you the second method we did for G before in the red pen and show you the same method for this one. So the square root of 2, you could do the square root of 44, but let's simplify this 22 first. So it's going to be 2 times 11. And then we're going to have the square root of 2 times, and then we'll just separate these, the square root of 2 times the square root of 11. So root 2 times root 2 is just 2, and then we've got square root of 11. Now, if you wanted to do it the other way, you're thinking, why didn't we do square root of 44? There's nothing wrong with doing that. You'll see in a sec how we'll get the same answer. So that 44 has just come from 2 times 22, so square root of 44. And then we need to simplify that because the square root of 44 can be simplified because the number 4 is a factor. So 4 times 11, and then we separate that out. And so the square root of 4 is 2, and then 2 root 11. So either way, sometimes it would be easier to do one way over the other, or you might have a personal preference, but just make sure that whatever method you choose, you just take your time and make sure you don't make any mistakes. Okay, I don't really have much room. I just wanted to do one of the other ones down the bottom. So I'm just going to erase this just so I've got a bit of space. Okay, so let's have a look at the square root of 12, the square root of 8. So I'm doing K. Now both of these can be simplified, so you can simplify them first if you want to, or you'll realize that both of them have 4 as a factor. So let's just, it's 4 times 3 times 4 times 2. And then when we simplify this, that becomes 2 root 3, and this one becomes 2 root 2. And I'm not going to go through that step because that's what you did in 3A. So hopefully you know how to get from here to here in simplifying those surds. And now we just multiply the number in front. So 2 and, I thought I made a mistake. 2 times 2 is 4. And then under our square root sign, we've got 3 times 2, which is 6. Okay, so make sure you can simplify. All right, let's move on to question 2. So here we have probably a little bit more complicated. We've got a number out the front that isn't 1, whereas in question 1 we didn't. And I'm just trying to think. I don't want to start off with some easy ones. Let's start at question D. So I've got negative 5 root 10 times the square root of 30. Okay, so you can, if you wanted to, do 10 times 300. That's going to be a bit of a pain. Try to avoid large numbers if possible. So you can simplify this 10 at the moment, but I'm going to leave it as a 10. And when I say simplify it, you could do 2 times 5, but I'm not going to do that because that's not really going to work for me in the end. So see how I've got the 10 here? I'm going to rewrite that 30 as 10 times 3. Now, we're not simplifying our surds. So at this point, we're not looking for a square number. Okay, what I'm doing here is trying to get a number that is the same. Okay, so here I've got 10 and here I've got 10. Right, so I'm going to show you both ways. So you can either do it this way, or I'll show you the other way in a sec. Okay, so I've got -5 root 10 times, and then you can separate this, root 10 times root 3. Now this becomes 10. So effectively I've got -5 times 10 root 3, which is -50 root 3. Okay, so that's one way. And I've shown you both ways with the previous question, but I'm showing you again here. Now, if you prefer, you can just do 10 times 30 here. So 10 times 30 is 300. Now, taking out a square number. So sometimes it might be a bit difficult, especially with higher numbers, to think, oh, what is the highest square number that goes into 300? But I know because it's a multiple of 100 that 100 does. Just happens to be a nice, easy number. So I've got 100 times 3, -5, and then I'm just going to separate this to be the square root of 100 times the square root of 3. So here I've got -5 times 10 times root 3. So I've got -50 root 3. So either method. Okay, so it might be a good idea to choose one of the questions and think about which method you want to do. But as I said before, this method on the right side, if whatever you're multiplying could be a very large number, and it might be difficult to think of a square number that goes into it. Okay, let's scroll down. And I might just draw a line here. Okay, so let's do one with brackets. Not that it's going to be, I'm not going to do this one because that just becomes 5. So let's do J. Okay, so -2 root 7 times -3 root 14. Now we had a root 7 times root 14 above. Okay, so I'm going to pick what I think is the more straightforward way. But if you have a preference, you do that. So first of all, let's just multiply these numbers out the front of the surds. So -2 times -3. And then I've got root 7 times root 14. Okay, I'm not doing that just yet. So -2 times -3, two negatives when multiplied gives us a positive. So it's going to be +6. Now, you can do 7 times 14. But I'm going to separate this 14 to become 7 times 2. And what? 7. Okay, so I've just separated this surd here to be square root of 7 times the square root of 2. Now remember, when you've got this, it becomes the square root of 49, which is just going to be 7. So I've got 6 times 7, which is 42, root 2. Okay, so this method here, the root 7 times root 14, we did earlier. Okay, but this time we've just got another number there. So 6 times 7 is 42, and then we're just left with the root 2 on the end. All right, moving. Now, just before I do, remember there's solutions at the end of this worksheet. So if you're unsure, just refer to the solutions, or you can ask me and I'm happy to go through any of them with you. Okay, let's start off with, let's just start with A. Okay, because we're doing a division now. So the square root of 20, I hate divisions written like that. I much prefer divisions written like this. Okay, so square root of 20 is divided by the square root of 2. Now, you could simplify that if you like, but we're not going to. We're going to write it like that. Okay, so we're just putting both surds under the square root sign, and then 20 divided by 2 is going to be 10, so the square root of 10. Let's have a look. Are there any harder ones there? Let's look at G. I don't know why I chose G. Now, some people would say let's simplify them first. So if you simplified square root of 40 and simplify the square root of 8, you're going to spend probably 2 minutes longer doing that than just saying, all right, that's going to be the square root of 40 over 8. And 40 divided by 8 is 5, so it's root 5. Now, if you went ahead and simplified this square root of 40, which becomes 2 root 10, and if you simplified this, which is 2 root 2, so those 2's cancel out. So now I'm left with square root of 10 and the square root of 2, and then put that all under one fraction. Okay, so I did that quite quickly, but this part probably would have taken you a bit longer than what it did for me. But I just wanted to show you that simplifying the surds first isn't always the quickest way. Simplifying them at the end is better. All right, so let's just scroll and I don't think there's any problems with any others there. That's pretty straightforward. So let's do some questions from number 4. Okay, so let's do D. All right, so we've got negative 8 root 2 over 2 root 26. All right, so if we did keep the negative sign there, doesn't go away. So 8 over 2 is 4. Okay, and then I've got 2, and so that's 4 over 1, so I don't have to write that as a fraction. And I probably shouldn't do that so big because it looks like the 4th root. That's just a 4, not the 4th root. And that 2 over 26, oops, that was a 2. And then 2 over 26 becomes 1 over 13. And I don't think we're supposed to simplify it any further. The thing is, the square root of 1 is just 1. So I'm wondering if it's going to leave the answer as this. Let's just have a quick look. So 4D, wasn't it? Oh no, it hasn't. Just left it as a square root of 1 over 13. Sometimes interesting with these questions because, and you'll find when we do the next chapter, we don't usually leave the denominator as a square root. So that would actually become negative 4 over root 13. So there's all different ways of doing it, but again, we wouldn't leave the denominator as a square root or a surd. But I'll leave that there for now because the textbook has said that's the final answer, but you can see you can keep simplifying it. Should I do one more? Oh, long video. I might leave it there. Okay, see ya.